Hello, pop culture nerds. Welcome to All the Fanfare. My name is Eric Pierce, and today we're going to be talking about Season 1 of The Wire. The Wire is a show many consider the greatest of all time, including none other than former President Barack Obama. That anecdote makes me wonder what other recent presidents would consider their favorite shows. I think Trump obviously would be The Apprentice. George W. Bush, I'm going to throw out something like Gunsmoke. I think it's got to be some kind of Western. Bill Clinton, given the era and just his general disposition, I'm going to throw out something like Three's Company. I think right time frame, pretty horny show. I think it checks the boxes. Joe Biden, this is the tricky one. I think it has to be inoffensive, unexciting. I'm going to go with Antiques Roadshow, and the fact that it's also bit of an age joke, I don't really hate that. I actually think that works in its favor. But The Wire, we're talking about The Wire. If you are uninitiated, it's a crime drama that ran on HBO from 2002 to 2008, focused on the drug trade, corrupt institutions, inner city life. But really, the show is about Baltimore, both as a setting and a character itself. Showrunner David Simon was a journalist at the Baltimore Sun in the 80s. He turned those experiences into a book called Homicide: A Year on the Killing Streets. And many of those characters and incidents from the book end up on the show, so if you've seen any of The Wire, you know that's a heck of an advertisement for the book. I've got a quote here that I'm going to read. Simon, talking about The Wire, says, "We're not selling hope or audience gratification or cheap victories with this show. The Wire is making an argument about what institutions, bureaucracies, criminal enterprises, the cultures of addiction, raw capitalism, even, do to individuals. It's not designed purely as entertainment. It is, I'm afraid, a somewhat angry show." End quote. That's a heck of a quote, and David sounds super smart with that quote. I'm just going to say, I don't disagree with anything he said there. I was both immensely gratified and entertained by the show. So I don't know, maybe the problem is me, but I think it's season 1, super entertaining. So The Wire came out over 20 years ago. Why am I only now talking about it? Main reason is I only just recently watched it. And my motivation for watching it now is a bit embarrassing, which is why I'm going to share it with you. I'm a big fan of The Crown on Netflix, which is kind of funny because in real life, not a fan of the royals. I believe we fought a war with England so that I don't have to care about who wears the crown. But as a narrative television show, The Crown is really top notch. And one of my favorite characters on the show actually is Prince Charles, which in real life I think Prince Charles is I don't think very highly of him. But Charles on the show, played by actor Dominic West, I don't know, something about the way he plays him, his mannerisms. He just really pulls off kind of the whole out of touch, aggrieved wanker angle. And I'm just a fan. So when I saw Prince Charles's face, aka Dominic West, the actor, I saw his face on a still for The Wire when I opened up HBO, I don't know, back in December or something. And I said, holy crap, Prince Charles is in this too? I need to watch it. Speaking of familiar faces, there's something kind of funny about coming to a show or a movie years after the fact and recognizing all these people from things they've done later in their careers, things you associate them with. So like in the case of Dominic West, for me, I'm always going to associate him with The Crown, even though 20 years earlier he did this little show called The Wire and is quite good in it. But there's all kinds of these faces that pop up. Wendell Pierce plays Bunk, and my first exposure to him was on Jack Ryan, and I'm currently watching Suits right now, which another great show, and so he pops up there playing. Funny enough, tie back to the Royals, playing Meghan Markle's father on the show. Lance Reddick, first saw him on Fringe something like 20 years ago, and then of course later in the John Wick series. Wood Harris, first of all, impeccable name. I don't know if it's his real name or if that's his stage name, but full marks. He's one of those guys you see pop up all over the place, recognize him from other things. I most recently saw him in Winning Time, where he played a coked out of his mind Spencer Haywood, which is a neat bit of symmetry considering he plays a drug dealer on The Wire. Michael B. Jordan, looking like he's maybe 13 years old, pops up in The Wire. And maybe one of my favorite revelations, I've been using the black guy slowly having a revelation while the camera spins around him gif for years. And the moment when that gif happens on the show, I had one of those moments where I paused it and rewatched it because I was like, holy crap, this is where this comes from. And, that's a Weebay if you're familiar with the show, but great scene. Let's dive into the very first scene of the show, which I think sets up everything that comes in season 1 and is a nice little microcosm of why this show is so interesting, intriguing, and good. So the very first scene opens with inner city Baltimore. It's night. There's a dead body in the street. Police cruisers are on the scene, lights flashing. There's a detective sitting on a stoop talking to a young black man about what happened. The dead body has a name. It's Snot Boogie. And first of all, poor guy. Not even in death does he have the dignity of his real name. I mean, the detective knows it and brings it up, but he's Snot Boogie. And that's something that he just carried his whole life. But the story essentially of what happened here, and again, this actually happened. So I mentioned earlier, David Simon used a lot of the stories from his book as inspiration for the show. This story with Snot Boogie really happened, down to all these details. All the boys from the neighborhood, including Snot Boogie, would play a craps game in the alley every Friday night. And without fail, when the pot in the game got really huge, Snot Boogie, Mr. Boogie, would grab the pot and just book it. And then everyone would chase him down, beat on him, and then move on with their business, I guess. And then next Friday, they would roll it right back. They'd play some more craps. Snot would grab the money and run, and they'd beat him up. Well, this time, I guess someone got tired of playing the game or whatever, but he put him down with a bullet. So the Detective McNulty, who we meet later, who is played by my boy Dominic West, asks the obvious question: If Snot does this every week, why do you let him play? And the young man says, got to. This America, man. That answer hung with me pretty much the entire time I was watching season 1, because I tried to understand what is he really saying? Why is he saying that? And my first thought was, this is America, land of the free. So, they're letting him participate as a freedom of choice situation, or maybe giving him second, third, fourth, fifth chances. Maybe it's just an acknowledgement of the fact that they're boys. This is just what he does. This is his quirk. But after I watched the entire season, I think it's more an acknowledgement of the ties binding everyone to this inner city Baltimore. The drug dealers, the drug users, the cops, they're all tied together and seemingly unable to escape. And it's almost like an acknowledgement that people are compelled to do things that are maybe not in their best interest, but they're trapped essentially. I don't know if that's the right read on it, but that's what I got out of it. And considering, again, this is like the first 3 minutes of episode 1, it's kind of funny that it hung with me like that. The other thing that, as I was watching season 1, I kept drawing similarities to New Jack City, which came out in 1991, the Wesley Snipes film. Similar subject matter. It's about a ruthless drug kingpin who thinks nothing of poisoning his community because he only cares about his bank account, essentially. But it's not really a fair comparison. It's actually an inaccurate comparison. I think Nino Brown, the Wesley Snipes character in New Jack, he's more like a caricature of a person. And by the end of the movie, he basically goes full Scarface. Nobody on The Wire is one-dimensional, and that's really where the show gets all its juice from. And at least for me, seeing characters that feel like real people, that's exciting because you don't know how they're going to behave. They surprise you in delightful ways sometimes. I think one of the best examples of this is one of the first people we meet, D'Angelo Barksdale. He seems like a stereotypical gangbanger when we meet him. It's at a trial where he's accused of murdering someone in cold blood, and it seems like they have him dead to rights. They've got all the evidence. He seems a bit remorseless about the whole thing. He gets off, and it seems like he's just a thug. But you quickly find out he's actually, I don't want to call him a good guy, but he's actually one of the good guys on the dealer side, at least. He has principles. He's concerned about what's going on in the community. He's reluctant. We're gonna come back to D'Angelo, but it's interesting because he ended up becoming one of my favorite characters by the end of the show. Let me just run down a list of some of these other characters that really just jump off the screen for me. And I think in terms of jumping off the screen, Stringer Bell, played by Idris Elba, dude literally leaps off the screen the first time you see him. It's, going back to what I was saying earlier about discovering someone later on in their career. I knew Idris from other things. I might even have seen him on Thor, of all things, before anything else. So, but it's a name that I've known for a while. I've seen plenty of his work. And watching him in The Wire, you're not surprised he goes on to become a big star because the camera just loves him. Dude's obviously super handsome, charming, and he, as the drug lord's like number 2, he's kind of a executioner, I'd say, but he's a smart guy. He's sophisticated. He's going to college studying economics. He always feels like he's a few steps ahead of the detectives. So I'm looking forward to, to quote Emperor Palpatine in The Phantom Menace, I'm looking forward to seeing his career develop. Gotta talk about Omar. You come at the king, you best not miss. I mean, that's one of probably the best lines from season 1. The reason that line hits so hard, he's basically like the Boba Fett of drug dealers. He's a one-man show. I mean, he has a couple of guys with him, but essentially he's it. And he's going up head-to-head against Avon Barksdale, who's, kind of like he who shall not be named. Omar has no fear going up against him. And he hits Avon's stash houses. He kills Avon's men, and he isn't really that afraid of him or anything. It's funny, Omar doesn't look like the king. Like, if you would look at it and say, who's the king of the Baltimore inner city drug game? Avon. He's got the properties, he's got the organization, he's got the muscle. It's a multi-million-dollar organization, But Omar, he behaves in a kingly fashion in that he's not afraid of anybody. And that's just part of why he's such a great character. And by the way, he's also gay, which is something it was probably revolutionary in 2002 when season 1 came out. Even in 2024, it feels revolutionary. I can't think of another black drug dealer / gang member type who has ever been gay. And maybe that's reflection on the stuff I watch, but I tend to watch this kind of stuff and it still feels different and fresh even in 2024. The cops, I've been talking a lot about the drug dealer side of the equation. The cops get equal billing as far as treating them as three-dimensional people, and as a whole they're not really all that heroic. They're a bit of a mess. There's a lot of infighting. The show spends a lot of time with kind of bureaucratic pissing contests and turf wars and stuff that are going on within the police department, which compromises the efforts to investigate and bring these drug dealers to justice. McNulty, he's probably the closest thing to the show's protagonist, but the dude is a huge mess. He's a cheater. He's got drinking problems. He's cocky. He's arrogant. He thinks his crap don't stink. And he also, he's really good at his job, and he knows he's good at his job, and he wants you to know that he's good at his job. So he doesn't have a lot of fans in the office. Detective Freeman, this guy, we're going to talk about my favorite characters at some point here. He's definitely up in the ranks, which is kind of funny because he's definitely a slow burn character. When we first meet him, I literally thought he was like Stanley Hudson, like 2.0, because he's this I don't want to say elderly because that's not the right word. He's an older black man who just seems content to punch in, do his hobby. In Stanley, it was Sudoku. Lester's got a cooler hobby. And then punch out and not really. I mean, Stanley was a good salesman on The Office, and Lester, turns out he's a great cop. He'd just been mothballed doing crappy work, and he's actually probably the best policeman on the unit. And just what an incredible character. But so let's talk about the hobby for a second. The dude handcrafts doll furniture. And aside from the fact that that's kind of crazy, the crazier fact is that he's not like at home in the closet in the basement doing it. He brings that into the office around all these macho types, and he thinks nothing of it. And yeah, I just loved it. And not for nothing, but I've never played with dolls. I've always thought doll furniture is rather fascinating. I wanted a piece of his furniture. It looks exquisite. But yeah, in general, the cops are just as self-serving as the drug dealers, and it's the show does play a lot in the grays. There's definitely good guys, there's definitely bad guys, and you can't look at the dealers as being good guys, but you come to understand their motivations and them as people. And so it just sets up this really cool dichotomy where you're watching, you're understanding both sides of it, and even though you want to see the comeuppance come, you kind of don't, because you come to like these people. I want to break down some of my favorite scenes on the show. One of them, it's kind of a jokey scene, but I think it's indicative of what it's like to be a man. So there's a scene, I don't remember. It's midway through season 1, and Herc and Carver are moving a desk from one room to another, and it's stuck in a doorway, and they're grunting and groaning and trying to move it, and it's not going anywhere. So every man that subsequently enters the room looks at it, kind of scoffs that these guys can't get it done, and then rolls up his shoulders and like, let me show you how it's done. And they can't do it either. And that's what's so just exquisite about the scene is, as a guy, like, I've done this. I have been on both sides of this where like I've been stuck with something and someone else has been like, let me show you something, and they can't do it either. But even more so, I've been the guy walking in the room and being like, okay, you're an idiot, you're weak, like, daddy's here, let me show you how it's done. And of course, you know, it usually isn't done. Usually daddy is just as weak and stupid as the other ones. So yeah, it's just I just love that scene, and the revelation about why the desk wasn't moving is just, it's just chef's kiss. Like it sums up being a man in about a minute. And I don't want to spoil it in case you haven't seen season 1, but great scene. I really enjoyed the basketball game where, so we've got Yvonne Barksdale and another drug kingpin. Apparently they have an east side, west side kind of situation going in the projects. And once a year they play a basketball game for bragging rights and a little bit of money. And so everyone from the projects comes out to watch the game. So it's street ball basically. And, you know, I'm a big fan of basketball games in movies in general, or movies about basketball games, above the rim and stuff like that. So, you know, it had me for that already. It was also cool just seeing, up to this point, the cops and the dealers have been, it's kind of been a cat and mouse situation where the cops are watching from a distance and, you know, taping the dealers and just taking notes. But here we had Herc and Carver and some other cops coming and like standing side by side with the dealers, watching the game, getting caught up in the action. And it was just a cool little moment. It almost felt like a truce, like, hey, let's stop and watch this thing. The cops were still looking for Avon during the whole scene and everything, but it just was a neat little moment. Kima going undercover, probably maybe one of the only real action scenes the entire season, or at least traditional action. I mean, there's some chase things and things, some shootings, but in terms of the way it was set up and established and everything, it's really the only action scene that stands out in my mind. And it was less action and more just kind of tension, rising tension, and very claustrophobic. She's out of sorts. She doesn't know where she is. You know, the cavalry is circling. They can't find her. Just a great scene. And then the immediate fallout afterwards. Just loved it. I really enjoyed, there's a scene where Bunk and McNulty are trying to piece together how the young black woman had been murdered some time ago. This ties into the story D'Angelo told about it. And seeing them reconstruct the scene based on the evidence that had been taken at the time, photographs that had been made, it was just cool to watch them do police work, I guess, in that way. And just the way you got the sense that these guys knew each other really well, because they worked without even communicating, and they were just going about their business. And I'm not a fan of police procedurals in general, but I really liked how that scene was done. My last favorite scene, and this is maybe my favorite scene, and it's actually, I'm going to cheat, it's actually 3 scenes, but it's anytime D'Angelo is teaching the young dealers down on the, I can't remember what they call it now. I want to say the corner, but the flats, you know, the area with the orange couch where they'll hang out. I don't know. This is why I ended up loving D'Angelo so much, is he's thoughtful and he's teaching them about life. And so there's the lesson with chess. So he comes up, and Wallace and I think it was Bodie, one of the other guys, were playing checkers with a chessboard, and then he says, no, that's crazy, chess is way better. And then he starts explaining the game, and you quickly can see he's teaching them the game. Almost, he's using, you know, the words king and queen and stuff, but he's almost he's talking about it through the lens of their lifestyle. He even he says pawns get capped quick, and they're just the foot soldiers, and even one of them makes the analogy that the king is Avon, D'Angelo's uncle, the kingpin. So just a really cool moment like that one. The chicken nuggets analogy where Wallace is going on about how good the chicken nuggets are, and the guy that invented them has got to be rich, and then D'Angelo is saying, no, that's not the way the world works. Ronald McDonald isn't going to come downstairs and give him a check for his great work. He's going to get him back to work. I just enjoyed both of those scenes. I think they are they really do a good job of showing what their situation is like through these analogies. And then the other one is just the way D'Angelo, he just talks about how the drug trade is done, and kind of laments that it has to be about beating people and killing people, and that it can't be more humane. I don't know. I just basically anytime D'Angelo was talking to the kids, it seemed like those ended up being some of my favorite scenes. So the question then, is The Wire the best TV show I've ever seen? It's way too early to make that call. I've only watched season 1 out of 5, so I've seen 20%, if my math's right, and it is 20% of the show. That would be like saying A New Hope is the best Star Wars movie after you've got through the cantina scene, which, the cantina scene is where you meet Han, and obviously Han's the best thing in Star Wars, so I get how you could get there, but it's definitely too early to say it's the best show I've seen. I think I mentioned I'm not a huge fan of procedurals, and there's definitely a procedural element to the show, which I don't hate, but and then the other thing, I don't know if Deadwood is my favorite show, but it's definitely in my top 3, and Deadwood, it's just the one that comes to my mind right now. It sets a really high bar. So for The Wire to get past that, I need to see some more, but fortunately I still have 4 more seasons. So I'm going to reserve my judgment on calling it the best show, but it is very, very good. Hopes for season 2. Well, I hope we get some prison scenes, because the way season 1 ends, some people go to prison. And I'm hoping that the story follows them, and we get some of the scenes of them in jail and things going on with that. What's going on with Weebay's fish? Homie was really concerned about his fish. Is anyone taking care of them at this point? Are they all dead? I mean, he had some fish tanks. I've seen some fish tanks. This guy had some fish tanks. Clearly, he put like all his money in fish. And I just hope they're not all dead. They probably are. Is Lester Freeman hooking up with D'Angelo's girl? The show seemed to be heading that way, and she seemed like she was down with a lifetime of doll furniture from him, and he definitely liked what she had going on. Speaking of new duos, I would be totally in for watching Bunk and Freeman as the new detective pairing now that McNulty is off doing something different. I don't know if that's where the show goes, but if it does, I'm fully on board with that. And my last thing for season 2, I really hope Bubbles gets clean. They teased us, they tantalize us with that in season 1. If he doesn't get clean, I hope he at least ditches the white kid, because man, that kid freaking sucks. Every time I look at his face, he has one of those faces that makes me irrationally angry, I guess, because he just annoys the crap out of me. But that's it for this episode, this inaugural issue of All the Fanfare. We'll be back next week, not talking about season 2, unfortunately, because it's going to take me a little while, and I want to enjoy season 2. I don't want to blaze through it, so I'm going to take my time with it. So next week I'll be talking about Dungeons and Dragons, which I know what you're thinking has nothing to do with a show like The Wire, but I just like to talk about stuff I like, and D&D is one of the big things in my life. and it's celebrating its 50th anniversary. So we're going to talk a bit about the game, where it's been, maybe where it's going, probably some personal stories of my own about how I came to it, why I like it, that kind of thing. And yeah. So although the podcast is called All the Fanfare, this is not actually all the fanfare. This is not the full Monty. This is a third of what I offer. I have the website allthefanfare.com that has long form articles, and then I also have the newsletter. So if you liked this, you'll find plenty more in the same vein on allthefanfare.com. If you enjoyed this, please leave a comment, leave a review on your podcast app of choice. And until next time, peace out. Beep. When I write articles, I like to use footnotes to go off on little tangents that are sometimes completely unrelated to the topic. I thought it might be fun to do some audio footnotes here at the end of the podcast to talk about things I thought of retrospectively after recording the podcast, to correct mistakes that I made, or just even to just make fun of myself. So that's what this is. Footnote 1, I talked about David Simon at the top of the podcast. He goes on to work on several notable shows after The Wire. The one I'm most interested in is called We Own This City, another HBO drama about corruption within the Baltimore Police Department, which sounds a lot like The Wire 2.0. It also stars perennial my guy John Bernthal, so that's going to be next for me after I finish The Wire. Footnote 2, Idris Elba. I'm actually 99% sure the first time I saw him was not in Thor, but as Charles Miner in The Office, which I think is a bit less embarrassing of an admission. Speaking of The Office, footnote number 3, I talked about Stanley playing Sudoku, but mostly he did crosswords. I think my statement was correct. He does play Sudoku, but it's usually crosswords, so I do want to correct that for my Office fans out there. Footnote 4, the moving the desk scene. When I was re-listening to that, I realized I said the guys walking into the room subsequently roll up their shoulders. I meant to say roll up their sleeves, but I left roll up their shoulders because I think you still get the idea across. Footnote 4, the area where D'Angelo and his dudes were selling drugs was called the Pit, not the corner of the flats or whatever I was trying to call it. Total brain fart. I'm sure someone out there that loves The Wire was screaming at their phone as I was fumbling around with the name, but it's the Pit. Footnote 5, I have started season 2 of The Wire. No idea when you'll get a podcast episode on that. I intend on doing one for season 2 and subsequent seasons, but TBD on when that'll be. Where am I? Footnote 6, We-Base Fish Tanks. So I go on about how impressive his fish tanks are, and I say something like, I've seen some fish tanks, as though like I'm a fish tank guru. In fact, the fish tanks I'm mostly familiar with are those at the grocery store, the sad-looking ones where the fish are kind of like half swimming, half floating to the bottom because they're not being taken care of. I have no idea why I said that. Footnote 7, I've never actually seen the full Monty, but the name and premise is stuck in my head for 20 plus years, and I just kind of find the idea of it hilarious and basically use it whenever possible. All right, that's the last footnote, the final countdown. Come back next week to get super nerdy with me and talk about Dungeons and Dragons.